So, Dr. Kriegel, very happy to have you do this interview for us. And, we want to talk about future of work and how, right now in this COVID environment, whether you're a business, some businesses are really negatively affected and they've had to lay off a lot of people. And hopefully, as we start to transition away from that, they'll start hiring again. Or we've got a situation where there's some companies, food industry, some food companies, toilet paper companies, things like that, that are exploding during these times, and then they're needing to hire a lot more people. So whether you're having to hire back or you're hiring to catch up with, demand, hiring is a big deal. And I think now more than ever, it's so important that we get it right, as right as we can. It's an art, not a science, but there's some science to it. So before I want to talk to you a little bit about some of your advice and thoughts around hiring the right people. But before that, could you just give me a little bit about, yourself and your background?
Sure. I have a PhD in psychology. My initial work was in the medical field, uh, developing a lot of treatment techniques for pain management. Transitioned into a more of a management role in that field, and then subsequently became a business consultant, specializing in growing companies. And so, from that standpoint, over the last 22 years, I guess it is, I've been involved in growing normally pretty large companies, but a lot of different companies. And obviously, if you're growing a company, hiring is at the very center of everything you do. So I've learned a lot about hiring practices and how to do it effectively and how to not do it effectively. So
Right.
got a lot of experience with it.
Well, and I think having that psychology background, at least, we've worked together a lot. I think having that psychology background is so interesting because you understand and you've really given us a lot of help in how to understand people. You
Right,
know, where
right.
I thought I understood people really well, but you've added a new a new level of understanding of people, and so that puts you at kind of an unfair advantage, I think, when it comes to hiring and profiling people. But one thing that I learned a lot from you, and I'd like for you to talk about this some, is um, when we were looking to hire certain positions, I remember you saying, put a list of everything that you want in that person and in that position. And of course, we came up with a list of, I don't know, 10, 20, 30, traits, character traits, experience. And, what did you say? Do you remember what you said about that?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's the one point I would make right off the bat, Lori, is that you're exactly right. Hiring is a very artistic skill set, but the more scientific you can be, the more consistent you'll be, and the more you'll get the right players on your team. And so when we were discussing at that time uh, a process of constant improvement, and that what you want to look at hiring is not something that you ever feel like you've arrived, that it's something you always want to try to improve. And that's where science comes in. And measurement in measuring humans is extremely difficult. And you'll see all manner of different uh, devices, processes, tests, things of that nature that have been developed and used, but there's no effective measurement that's consistent across all people. So if that's the case, then what you can do is kind of make your own yardstick, and that's where evaluating a particular role in an organization is so important, and then developing a list of the characteristics that will fit that role best. And then as we go through this, I can kind of give you a further idea about how to develop it. But that list of characteristics is where you start with.
Can we ever, I remember you saying, okay, here's the laundry list of things that you want. And now in reality, there's no perfect person. So
Oh yeah,
the hardest thing I think we had to do was we had to stack rank them.
yeah,
And we had to figure out what was the most important. And then eventually you had to kind of say what was the least important. Even though you wanted it, you may not get that when you're looking for a candidate. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes a lot of us make is we think we're going to get everything, and you're not, because none of us are perfect, right?
Right.
So what is the most important? And that was a real hard exercise, I think, for us.
It is, and that's where step two with that process is to take the characteristics that you said you would like, and as you said, the laundry list, and then rank order them with whatever number you have, most to least. And that discussion between interviewers really is a powerful way to kind of create a model that allows you to then see in the interview process what you're looking for. But I can illustrate it with a quick story of what we're talking about. I was working with a large company, a $2 billion a year company in Northeast Ohio, probably about 10 or 11 years ago. And they were looking for a senior vice president of finance. And so I'm in a meeting with the president of the company, and I guess there's probably about 9 other vice presidents that were there. And I asked this very thing. I said, so, what are the characteristics of what you're looking for? And they, started listing out like, and they wanted obviously CPA, and they wanted 10 years experience in manufacturing, and this and this, and they listed all this stuff. And after they had listed about 15 different items, I said, just out of curiosity, since this guy is going to be intimately involved with your financial life, would it be a good thing for them to have integrity? And I said, or is it okay if we hire a thief? And what was even more interesting is, guess where they rank ordered integrity? Above everything.
Exactly.
If somebody's got a CPA and they've got 10 years experience in manufacturing, and they've managed 100 people before and all these other kind of things, but they don't have integrity, they're not going to give you much help in that role. So the key characteristic in rank ordering those things is to look at the role that you have, and what are those personality characteristics, skill sets, experiences, and rank order them most to least important. It doesn't mean you don't want it all, you do. But as you said, since none of us are perfect, you have to decide, okay, if I got to give up something, what do I want to give up? Mm-hmm. And looking at that, you'll find almost invariably it's the core values or the personal characteristics that outweigh most everything else.
Yeah, I think we had a very similar discussion, because we had all these all these experiences listed, knowledge, and all these other things. And I think you said the same thing. You asked some question about, I don't even think it was integrity, but it was something else. It was another core value type fit, to the team. How important is that? And we looked around and we just said, well, that's the most important, but we didn't think about it. And I think that is what you helped us with the most, which was, not just ranking the character traits and the skills and things like that, but also understanding how important the hiring for core values. And right. What are those core values? We had our core values, but we weren't using them enough in our interviewing process.
Right.
And I think that's what a lot of people do. They get excited about somebody with experience or somebody with a specific, knowledge, and they don't necessarily fit the core values of the company.
And that, Laura, you mentioned something that's really a good example of how in the hiring process things often aren't exactly as they seem. Okay, experience is one of those. And so the assumption is that if I have a role that I want to fill, and it's one that's we're going to require a fair amount of technical knowledge or skill set or some form of that if I hire someone that's experienced, that will work better. And that's very true if it is somewhat of a universal role, okay, like a lot of accounting roles are pretty common across organizations, okay? But there are a lot of idiosyncrasies in each organization. And so what you find is that if you hire somebody with lots of experience, then they will come in with that experience, which is great. But what that really means is they're going to do the job the way they've been doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that the way you want it done?
Right. So they come to you with a little bit of baggage. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that there's no free lunch, and so while on the one hand I may get that experience, and if that role requires consistency across organizations, like I said, like accounting or some skill sets like that, then that's a whole different thing. It fits usually much better. But if it's a more unique role, then they'll come in and do it the way they were doing it at their last job. So therefore, what you'll see is experience in certain roles may actually come behind intelligence and ability to acquire knowledge and use knowledge. So it, it really is something that, again, you have to constantly go back and take a look at the role and say, all right, what is it that we need most in that particular position?
So
I do think, just a quick point I would like to make sure I throw in, that in this new world of work, the remote worker, that role introduces some pretty radically different skill sets and needs. There's characteristics of that role that have to be there, or the whole system breaks down. One of those is being able to self-manage
right. Mm-hmm.
and motivate yourself, and the level of responsibility goes up pretty radically. And so you have to be very aware of that if you're going to work remotely, as most of my companies are right now.
Right.
That I had one where the guy, one of the best employees they had, was having a party every day. I mean, literally having a party every day. And it turned out that when someone was motivating him and supervising him, he was great.
Right.
But without that, he wasn't able to self-manage.
How do you any thoughts or recommendations on how to test for that, or how to ask that, how to find out if somebody has that ability to self-manage?
Well, one of the more important aspects of interviewing is to listen to not only what someone says, but what they did not say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And when it comes to the deficits or the things that interviewees won't have, it's going to fall more in what they don't say. So I would have asked, in order to kind of assess that, I would ask a question around previous experience in a non-supervised manner. So I would say, can you tell me, like if you and I were interviewing, I would say, Lori, can you tell me a time when you were at your previous job where you had a lot of autonomy, where you were kind of given the things to do and just left to your own devices? Can you tell me, how did you approach that, and what sort of things did you think were important? Now,
Good one.
if you answer, what I'm listening for are going to be autonomous thought processes, where I was supposed to do this report, I was supposed to get it out on time, I was supposed to have it done in this format, and so the person's explaining that, and I would listen for things that would tell me they were resourceful enough to figure this out.
Mm.
And what I want to hear is what, like I said, it's what they don't say.
Right.
It'll tell you as much as what they do say.
You also said ability to acquire knowledge and ability to, like you're saying, be resourceful and learn new things. I think unless you're just asking them to to build widgets and do it a certain way every single time and follow a specific process, I would think that is important to most jobs if they're going to be working remotely. So like you're saying, ability to,
Right.
to learn something, ability to be resourceful.
Right. Right. And I generally define resourceful as the ability and the willingness to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
That when faced with a challenge, they don't just sit there and wait for someone else to fix it or deal with it, that they figure out what to do. Now, along the way, you have to accept that they're not always going to do it the way you did it or would do it, or maybe not even do it right, but it's they at least try.
Right. What about one thing that I have found through the last 15 years is when somebody becomes, so right now, some companies are, you know, maybe they laid off too many people and now they're desperate to get people back, or they got, you know, maybe they're growing really, really fast and they need to fill positions. And one thing that I've read a lot about is, you know, having a manager desperate, the hiring manager that's desperate to fill a position and making a bad decision because it's kind of like that hiring bias. You know, you want that position filled so much and you found this candidate, so you kind of aren't really thinking through the whole process. What do you recommend to prevent that from happening?
um, the number one thing I would recommend is to ask somebody, how many times do you want to fill this position?
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough to have, uh, I worked originally with the Harris Casino that was built in Cherokee, North Carolina, and they hired me the end of the second year, yeah, because they had hired 1,672 employees the first year, and they hired 1,675 employees the second year. And by the end of the second year, they had figured out they weren't doing it quite right. So unless you want to hire that for that position multiple times, you will understand the prioritizing that's necessary in the hiring process. And just to finish that quick story is that the third year we only hired 400 more people. So
they got better at it.
Yeah, considerably better, and we changed some of the management processes too. But it's key to see that you can't get out from underneath the fact that hiring is the most important skill set in management, and you have to put the right priority on it. And if you try to short circuit it or shortcut it, you will pay a price, and it will be a big price. And just so you're aware of it, when I mean pay a price, there have been various studies, and I would encourage people to research these studies on hiring practices and the expense associated with hiring the wrong person. And it averages right at about 1.5 to 2 times the person's annual salary. Mm-hmm. So in other words, if somebody comes on board, you hired the wrong person, they've been there 10 months and you fired them, it's going to cost you to replace them is going to cost you about what that guy's salary was 1.5 times. So it's expensive. And then when you say, what does it do to my organization? Oh, okay, yeah, that scares people because, okay, maybe they don't know what they're doing because they hired the wrong guy. Oh yeah, everybody got mad at that guy because he wasn't doing a good job. And it disrupted all the processes associated with that role twice now. And are you going to do it right the second time?
Yeah. So in that case, if you're the hiring manager and you're making, you've kind of gotten, I think I've seen a hiring manager get kind of desperate to fill a position. And then I've seen a hiring manager, and I've been guilty of this too, of liking my own candidate a little too much, right? Feeling a little defensive if other people don't. What do you recommend for a leadership team or a company when making hiring decisions to make sure that, you know, the hiring manager has a lot of input, but they also have some help to prevent them from making that, being too connected to that candidate?
Well, a number of things. The first is uh, you have to have a core group of people that are going to be connected to that role, that are going to be involved in the interviewing. I think it's a very big mistake to have only one person interview people, or even just two. I like somewhere between 3 and 5. Again, I know that sounds like quite an allocation of resources, but I go back to how important is hiring. Okay, and the reason is pretty straightforward. It's not very pleasant, but it's that people lie, and it's a whole lot easier to lie to one person in one interview than it is to lie to 5 people over 5 interviews. And particularly if you team interview. And I'm not a big fan of putting people in front of a group of people. Okay, by team interview I mean the team gets together and discusses the interview and discusses the role, and then they pick various aspects of the discussion to interview the person. So one person will focus on characteristics of the job. One will focus on their experience or their work history, or you kind of divide up the discussion a little bit. But then after the interviews, you then get together and assess what everybody saw and heard, and you're looking for consistencies and inconsistencies and things of that nature. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is, as I said, we talked earlier about I call it a hiring template, and you have to realize that in measuring humans, it's easy to have like a stopwatch where you measure how fast they run, but to measure something like integrity or motivation or intelligence, or those are a lot more difficult to measure. And so you can either use what's called off-the-shelf techniques, which are various tests or things of that nature that you can buy. Or what I do is I create my own with this hiring template, where you take the group of people that are going to interview, as we said, ask them what the role characteristics are, rank order those, and then you have a template that you can use to rate the interviewee on those characteristics, and then the 5 or 4, however many it is, get together and discuss their ratings. Now, where that gets really valuable is that you can then keep that rating sheet, and then what you do is reevaluate your interview process from the perspective of a year later or 2 years later, if you hire that person. So, we interview somebody, all 5 people interview them, they fill out the rating sheets. We keep those rating sheets, put them in their personnel file, and then a year later we pull them back out and we take a look at it. And we then have a much more scientific way to evaluate our interview process.
That's a great idea. Yeah, that makes sense. So then you can go validate what you were interviewing on, and did you make the right decisions?
Right.
Based on how that person performed. So that's interesting, though. You said you think it's better to do individual interviews and then after the fact go and compare your interviewing or your interview notes with the team.
Right.
Why
is that? For multiple reasons. First, depending on the role, the ability to talk in front of a group is not going to be important. So the fact that somebody can sit in an interview process and have 5 people firing questions at them, that may be a non-factor for the role that I have. If somebody's, it's like I've been in manufacturing a lot, and hiring a shift manager, that's going to have 50 people reporting to him. Well, yeah, that role is important, that he can be in front of a group of people, because that's what he's going to be doing. Okay. But hiring somebody that's going to be in maintenance, fixing the machine, it doesn't matter, if he
Right.
can talk in front of a group. Many people find that intimidating.
Right.
There's been a lot of studies that show that public speaking is still one of the most frightening things for a vast majority of individuals. But the other part, again, backs up to a less pleasant aspect of interviewing, and that is that I want to have a way to validate someone's consistency in their answers and their interview process. So if I have 5 people hearing the same answer, that's harder to do. If I have 5 people asking similar questions in 5 different locations, then it's a lot harder for someone to lie in that circumstance.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then you compare interview notes
Right.
after the fact. And I also think in a group, maybe if you do, because we've done it both ways, if you do a group interview, you can also almost you can get into talking to each other as a leadership team
Right. Right.
more than you're really focusing on the person.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
What do you feel like if you had to pick one, if you're hiring and it doesn't matter what the position is, if you had to pick one character trait that you would hire for, what would it be?
Honesty.
How do you verify that?
5 interviews.
5 interviews,
And
different
and
people,
and
so that
some,
they say the same thing.
yeah, and lots of specific questions that would be very difficult to reproduce if somebody's not honest. And so again, one of the I'm fortunate with my background that I know how to get at the characteristics I want to. I will mention that one of the neat things about doing the hiring template, as I said, is that when you get that list of characteristics, you can look online and there are interview questions that will help you get to those characteristics. So SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Managers, they I haven't done it lately, so I don't know if they're still doing it, but they used to publish questions based on characteristics. So if I wanted to, have like 4 or 5 questions that would help me determine how honest this person was, then I would, I could go there and get 5 different questions off of their list. Does it make sense as to why I said honesty and why I said it so quickly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, without it, what do you have, right?
There, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, without it,
Exactly.
what do you have?
Yeah, it's part of it is that I grew up with some pretty tough family members preceding me, and one of them was my grandfather, and he used to frequently tell me that if you're not good for your word, you're good for nothing. And that really means something. My family was very military. If you're in a foxhole with somebody, and that guy says he's got your back, what do you need to know? And here's the key. And if he's lying, that's more dangerous than if he's not there at all.
True. Very
So
true.
if I have a 3rd shift manager that I'm hiring to, take on a new shift, we're expanding a particular plant, say, and I hire a 3rd shift manager, how important is it that I know that he's going to have the level of honesty that I need when there's nobody watching him?
Mm-hmm. One character trait that I've always really valued is self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. So self-awareness, I mean, obviously honesty is even more important, but having someone who's self-aware of their strengths, of their weaknesses, of who they are. What do you think about self-awareness as an important character trait?
Again, you have to go back and always look for the role. Okay. Not long ago, I helped hire a whole group of people that were going to be working in a plant, and the most important thing they wanted to know is how hot was it going to be in the plant. I
Yeah.
mean, and so their level of self-awareness didn't really have a big impact on their ability to do that job.
Right.
I think self-awareness in leadership
Mm.
is very important. So if you have leadership positions that you're going to be filling, I think that you absolutely want to look for folks that are going to have a level of courage and insight that it takes to look at themselves in a mirror and, here's that word again, honestly assess what they see.
Right.
Um, and I think that part of it too has to do with um, the management model that you're using. Okay, in the performance-based management model, then yes, self-aware individuals are going to be more effective in general, as I said, especially in the leadership roles. But in an administrative model of management, frankly, you create a bunch of boxes. That's what an administration is,
Mm.
and you're looking for people that'll get in the box and stay in the box.
Right.
Uh,
And I would think that's more important for a larger, right?
yeah,
Large organization. I
it
think
is.
that's what you've kind of, I know, talked to us about is smaller, more entrepreneurial businesses. You need people that can do a little bit more.
Yeah,
And, and then as you get bigger, you need to kind of segment people to do a
right.
specific job, you know, very
Yeah,
well.
yeah. It's the analogy is if you take all the roles in an organization, everything, and you make this pie out of them. A smaller organization is going to have a broad range of roles that get combined into one, but they may not be very deep. Okay, I've actually worked with a company that was a startup company. It was really a lot of fun. The guy that was the owner, uh, I asked him who was his HR manager, and he said, and he said, Steve. Some guy walked by, and he said, Steve, come here. And Steve came in. He said, Steve, what's your title right now? And he said, production manager. He said, okay, what were you before? He said, I was the accountant. He said, okay, well, you're the HR manager. So, so my point is, in a smaller company, it's not a deep role, so you can have multiple hats that you wear and are combined in that role. But as a company gets larger, you by necessity have to essentially get thinner in the role and deeper.
Hmm.
So the amount of work involved with accounting, for instance, or HR, or production manager, each of those three roles would get the amount that needed to be done in each of those areas would get beyond any one person. So you have to have somebody that comes in. Now, an important aspect of that gets into the hiring, and this is where I do a lot of work with companies that I'm helping grow. Um, the Particularly in some of the more technical roles, you have to have a much different level of skill set.
Mm.
So the Steve, the accountant, production manager, HR manager, he did not have a deep understanding of accounting. The person that we hired to replace Steve in accounting was a CPA.
Right.
Okay, so we wanted somebody that had a very extensive but narrow role. Okay, and he knew nothing about HR, and he knew nothing about production management.
What do you feel like, are there any other hiring best practices that you would like to tell, our clients and our contacts that, you would recommend other than what we've talked about? Is there anything else that you would recommend?
Actually, the biggest thing that I would recommend um, is similar to what we've talked about, but is to look at hiring as the not only the most important management skill, but it's also the skill that can give you by far the best competitive advantage in the marketplace. So that's why I elevate it so highly, is that it's just like any sports team. I mean, you've got analogies, all through sports. If I got the best players and I got the best coaches, I bet you I've got a good chance to win. And
Right.
so it's just that particularly from the top leadership of any organization and or anybody that's an owner to put the perspective on hiring, that it's what can help make us the most money.
Right.
That senior VP of finance, the guy that we hired, came on board, had obviously tremendous integrity, all the skill sets we wanted. We did a great hire with him. He was able to institute financial practices that it was within the first year reduced our expenses overall over the entire organization by 10%.
Yeah, the right hire can make a big difference.
And the wrong hire can kill you.
And the wrong hire can kill you. All right, the last question, we're just asking this as kind of a fun question, that there's been a lot of people talking about, the change, the future of work and everything changing because of COVID. But if you look out 6 months to a year, what's not changing about how we hire in your mind? What's not changing?
Humans.
Exactly.
Humans are a herd animal. I would caution everybody to be careful about the seductive nature of remote work. We have never done it this way. There's no research to prove that it will work. We are actually riding on an incredible level of inertia from hundreds of years of non-remote working. So I would caution everybody to be very, very careful to not get sucked into the fact that because we can do it in an emergency and because we've got technology that allows it, that somehow that becomes the best practice. I don't know if it is or it's not. I have some companies that I think we should try it, okay? But I think it's a real scary assumption and a dangerous assumption to assume that, yeah, all my people that are, they're responsible and they work the hours they said they were, and
right.
Yeah, not seeing each other, that helps us stay as a team. And we do these Zoom meetings, that works, right? Well, I don't know that we can say it can.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. And I think that maybe there's a combination. There's less of a need to control people's time and space, where they work and how many, where in a location, in an office, whatever. But I think we'll never, like you say, we're humans. So we'll never get rid of the fact that interaction in person is meaningful. And so I just interviewed someone who is a VP of HR for a big organization that they've been 100% remote for 10 years, but they get together once a quarter as a whole company, do vision casting, team building. And so they still have a need to have that direct interaction.
Right. And it means you again, back to the hiring practices, you have to hire for that role. Right. And that's where, again, I keep going back to that seduction, that just because somebody's working in this scenario right now for a couple months, that's a real big reach to say they can do that like this guy for the next 10 years.
Or that they even want to.
Yeah. And everybody that you, and I think probably anybody that is in your role or in a leadership role, have tried to have remote salespeople. Right. And that works real well with some and real not so well with others.
With others. Agreed. And I am just so thankful for your time. It's so valuable to hear your take on hiring. It's so important for all of us, for my business, for everybody's business out there. So thank you so much for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Lori. Take care.
All right. Take care. Bye.